Now, as I mentioned before, the other way to create NURB surfaces is to use curves. Now, before we start creating surfaces, we need to learn how to create curves. So we can do this in a couple of ways. First, we have a lot of different curves here on our shelf, or we can go into the Create menu, and under Curve Tools, we have these. Now, we also have a couple of other basic curves that we can do under NURBS primitives. The most important one is the circle. So if I want, I can select circle and then just create a circle, which turns into a curve. So if I right-click above this, you'll see that a curve also has control vertices. So if I select these vertices here, I can move it. And this is what we call a NURBS curve or a CV curve. And basically, we're moving the CVs, which are the control vertices. And then I can right-click here and go into object mode. But let's go ahead and show you some of the other ways to create curves in Maya. Now, I'm going to do most of this in an orthographic viewport because it's easier to draw curves that way. So I'm actually going to go into my top view. So we've got a couple of different curve tools. The most important ones are CV, EP, and Bezier. So we're going to start off with the CV curve tool, which creates a standard NURBS control vertex curve. So when I select this, you're going to see that I'm going to be able to lay down control vertices. So there's one. And the first one is always a box, so you can see that. The second one is always a U. So this is what we call the direction of the curve, and this will be important later. And then after that, we just start laying down points. So the third point, we're still not seeing a curve. We start seeing the curve on the fourth point. So once we have 4 points minimum, we have a curve. So you need at least 4 points for a CV curve. And then we can just start adding additional points to create whatever curve we want. You can hit Enter to end input. And then right-click and go into Control Vertex, and you can see each one of these vertices that we laid down are exactly there. So one of the things to notice about CV curves is that the curve will always be off of the points. So you're basically drawing an outer shell into which the curve is drawn. So if I right-click here and look at hulls, you can kind of see how this works. And it's kind of similar to how a subdivision surface would work in polygons. So I'm going to go ahead and go into object mode and select and delete that. And let's create the next type of curve, and that's the EP curve tool. Now, this is just a different way of inputting a curve, but the resulting curve will become a CV curve. Let me show you how that works. So I've got an EP curve tool. I'm going to go ahead and lay down a point. You see how that's an X. Lay down another point. At the third point, we start to get curve. So you need minimum of 3 points. And then again, we can just draw the curves. And just like with the CV curve, you hit Enter to end input. Now, if I right-click above this and go into Control Vertex mode, notice something interesting. And that is the EP curve, which we were drawing through the curve, has gone away and it's been replaced with a CV curve. So the EP curve is just an input method. The resulting curve will still be control vertices. So there's just 2 routes to the exact same point. And sometimes I like the EP curve because I can point exactly where I want the curve. I don't have to worry about the points being off the curve. Sometimes it's an easier input method. And that's really all it is. So let's go ahead and delete this. Now the next one is actually very different, and that's the Bezier curve tool. Now if you've used Illustrator or any 2D drawing package, you'll probably be somewhat familiar with these. What we do is we left-click and drag to create a curve, or just click to create a corner. So I'm going to go ahead and left-click and drag, and that drags out a Bezier handle. Left-click and drag again, create another handle. Now if I just click, I can create corners, which is very nice. And then if I drag, I can again create whatever shape I want. And again, Enter ends input. Now, if I right-click on this and go into Control Vertex, notice how the handles are still there. So this is not just an input method. It is an actual way of constructing the curve. So if you create a Bezier curve, it's going to continue to be a Bezier curve. And one of the really nice things about Beziers is that, well, you get real corners. And those are a little bit tough in CV curves. So if you want corners, go ahead and create them using Beziers. And again, with each of these, the handles control the depth of the tangent and the direction. And then the point controls where that curve is. So again, I'm going to go back into object mode, select the curve, delete it. And then we have a couple of others. One is the pencil curve tool, and this is kind of just more of a free-form input, and you can basically just draw whatever shape you want. Now, when you do that and right-click over it, you'll see that it creates a very fine CV curve. So again, this is a CV curve, so this is just another alternate way of creating CV curves. So the one thing about this is that it does create a lot of points, so you have to be aware of that if you're going to be turning this into geometry. And then finally, we have two different types of arcs. One is the 3-point circular arc, which allows you to lay down 1, 2, 3 points, and that third point determines the arc. So the arc goes through those 3 points, and again, enter creates it. And when we go into it, it is a CV curve. In fact, all of these turn into CV curves except for the Bezier tool. And then finally, a 2-point circular arc, which is basically just a very simple way of creating an arc. So as you can see, we've got a lot of different ways to create curves in Maya. So these curves can be used in two main ways. One is to create surfaces, such as NURB surfaces. The other is to be used as a path. Now, we saw this in extrude along a path when we were modeling in polygons, but you also can use them as animation paths. So now that we understand curves, let's go ahead and start building surfaces using curves.